I believed that if you were okay, then I could be okay. I needed you to be okay for me to be okay. But that's the thing about recovery is it's not our journey, it's my journey.
Welcome, Rachel, to the Inside Addiction podcast. It's great to have you on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so honored to be here, Luke.
Yeah, thank you. So I wonder if you could start us off just by telling us and the listeners, just a bit about your own story of addiction and drinking and also your families.
Yeah, thank you. That's it's a long story, so I'll try to be as brief as I can, but
Go ahead, take your time.
I actually wasn't raised in a family of addiction, which is interesting. My family's addiction was different. I would say I was raised in a family addiction, but it wasn't distinctly alcoholism. But I remember the first time that I had a real drink that hit me the way that drinking did. I was 21 years old and I had my first Long Island iced tea. And I had drunk up until then, tried to and to fit in, but had gotten sick. And it was this one Long Island iced tea when I was 21 that gave me a very specific feeling that I chased for the entire rest of my life. And what it did was it gave me a feeling of comfort in my own skin, because part of my issue is that I have a very people pleaser, codependent nature from my upbringing. And so my desire to try to make somebody else feel better, to how to fit in, drinking for me was a way to do that. I wasn't born with the genetics where as soon as the alcohol hit me, I wanted more. My husband has that genetics, but I had the genetics of not knowing how to be in the world, and alcohol gave me that ability to be in the world. And so I remember that one particular Long Island iced tea that was very different than my attempts drinking of beer in college, for example. And that really started a path for me to use alcohol as a way to be okay. I used to do shots before I went to work sometimes, to try to like loosen up before I went to work. And then I wasn't drinking alcoholically right off the bat, but I definitely did some binge drinking, I think. And then when I met my husband, one of the things that I loved about him, Luke, was that he drank like I did, right? So you find somebody who parties and participates in the world like you do so that you feel comfortable. So he and I meshed in our party capabilities and how we were together, and started a life together that was really focused a lot around social drinking. And as we developed a family, I felt that for me, drinking became a way to both have fun, but really how to manage my emotions that I didn't know how to deal with. And as we progressed, our drinking became more problematic in our relationship. And just this funny story is that early on, when I was pregnant with my first son, who is now 27 years old, so right, so 28 years ago, I was a flower, excuse me, I have a little bit of a cold. I was a flower designer and I was trading flower designs to this therapist for some therapy because we didn't really think we had any issues, but maybe you should just head some stuff off, right away. So we're in this therapy session. I'm pregnant with my son. And this therapist says, Rachel and Rich, I'm kind of going out there to tell you this, but I'll tell you what your major issue is that you're going to need to deal with. She said, I think the two of you have alcoholism. I think you have a drinking problem. And we both looked at each other like, what is she saying? Like, she's crazy, right? She's out of her mind. She doesn't know what she's talking about. And we literally never went back. We literally did not go back to that therapist because we didn't want to look at it. And we think now how amazing that was, that she could see that 27, 28 years ago. And then we tried to manage our drinking. I got really wrapped up in his being an alcoholic and not me being an alcoholic, right? I was so much easier to put the energy on him. And so, long story, everything had to completely crumble. There was about 15 years of real dark dysfunction, alcoholic drinking. And then 6 years ago, for me, there was just this moment of grace that just said, you got to do better for yourself. I want to live. I was blacking out. I was I was really drinking really, really dark and drinking like a box, half a box to a box of wine a day. Um, People didn't really know how bad it was for me. I was miserable in my marriage. I was miserable in my life. And I was really emotionally and spiritually bankrupt. And just this moment of grace that just said, you've got to give it a go. I had been sober for 3.5 years before. And this time I just said, I really got to do it. And so when I went in this time to the rooms, it was very different than it was the first time I went into the rooms because I'd been there before and I knew what it took. And something in me changed. And I dove in a way that I am so grateful for. And it's something that I now call soul recovery because it's not just the drinking, it's about what's underneath. And I finally addressed all the stuff that was underneath that was what felt uncomfortable in the beginning. So I've been sober in February, it'll be 6 years.
Congratulations, congratulations, that's amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah. And with you and your husband over all of those years, what has that been like? And did he kind of get sober when you did? How was that dynamic going back and forth? Did both of you sort of try in? Yeah, how did that work?
It's a great question, Luke, because the first time that we got sober, we went into the rooms and there was this old timer in there and she said, this isn't about the two of you, this is about each of you. And just like the therapist who had said, you guys are alcoholics, and we had thought she was crazy, we did the same thing. We kind of looked at this old timer and we're like, no, we're in this together because we're so codependent, right? I mean, this is ultimately what my community is all about in soul recovery, recover your soul, is there's so much codependence that happens when you're enmeshed with people. And so the first time we got sober, he was just like me. He went to meetings and was really invested and really involved. And then he kind of fell off. And then he stayed sober because I had said if he started drinking, I would leave him. And then I won't even get into that story. We'll bypass all that. And then we both started drinking again. And this time, when we got sober together again, right? We both went into the rooms together again, really avidly together again. But this time, I really left him to the side. And I really started doing Al Anon really intensely for myself, for him, and realized that I needed to do this for me, regardless of what he does. And he did AA with me for probably about a year. The pandemic came in all of that. So it got harder to go to meetings and I was more diligent in it. And the truth is, he's not sober like me. I think he's been on and off drinking this whole time. He was probably truly sober for a couple years, and then he's been on and off drinking. But that's the thing about recovery is it's not our journey. It's my journey. It's my journey. So right now in our relationship, I'm watching him have his own recovery story. And you know, when we went to Mexico last October, and I thought he was sober. So I believed he was sober this whole time because we've been married for 32 years. So there's nothing to think that we're lying about. And we're in Mexico and he shares with me that he's still been drinking. And my old self, before I did this soul recovery, would have been angry at him, would have felt like he had deceived me, would have felt like this was about me. And my recovered self saw a sick alcoholic. My recovered self saw a human being who is tackling the demon, which is an incredible demon. And that has been helpful for me because I have the demon. And if I think that this is an us and not an individual line, then I'm not going to do my own recovery. I'm going to be doing his recovery. And so it's really powerful to be able to watch him and release that part of him that I wish he says all the time, he's like, I wish I was on the same year sober you were, but it's not his, it's mine. I'm
Yeah,
I'm 6 years sober. So I've quit saying we don't drink. I used to say all the time, oh no, we don't drink. No, I don't drink. I don't drink. And I've let go of him.
yeah. And how do you manage that kind of lying? How has that been over the years for you lying to him? I'm sure that's happened a bunch of times and vice versa. Like, how do you manage that being lied to when he kind of doesn't admit he's drinking and then he does and that kind of stuff? How do you deal with it?
I think deceit is really powerful and there is a lot to it. And I think because I've become a spiritual coach and I've become a metaphysical minister in the midst of all of this and really done some deep spiritual work, if we live in our spiritual bodies and we truly understand that people come from pain, that his lying is not to me, it's really his way of battling what's going on within himself, then I can have compassion for him. There's boundaries, there's definitely boundaries. You don't let people walk all over you. And I think that's one of the things that ends up happening sometimes in um, our desire to accept everyone for exactly who they are, is that then we allow ourselves to be manipulated and mistreated. And I don't think that's the intention at all. When someone lies to you, you have to really look at, he's not trying to hurt me. He's actually trying to keep me from the pain that he knows that it will be. It's his own shame that keeps him from coming and telling me the truth, right? And so in our relationship, his just saying, I'm sorry I lied to you, isn't going to be enough. He needs to show up in a way that is going to be that he's working hard on himself. And so if I want him to amend to me in a way that is around my approval of him, then I'm getting all wrapped back up in the codependency stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, so you're taking a step back and recognizing it, that it's his pain and then that's what he's going through. And I don't want to speak for him, but in my own personal experience, also I've lied to myself a bunch, right? I don't want to admit it to myself that I'm still going through this. I don't want to admit it to myself what's happening. So it's not like I'm lying necessarily to the person or doing it to them. It's like I'm lying to myself. I don't even want to admit it and like you say, open that shame and really confront it. So it's not necessarily you're doing it to them. You're Yes, it has an impact and boundaries are important, like you said, but it's also like a reflection of where the person is at.
Exactly. Exactly. I think that's so huge because man, we're all going through it, and you think the amount of pain that we go into as an addict, the parts of us that are in so much pain, if you can have awareness of how it's so much in our own heads, and allow them to have that experience, then they can release a little bit of their shame, and that allows more union and connection around it. And there's a lot of people who have really wreaked a lot of havoc, and that can be really hard to let go of the past. But on some level, I've had to completely let go of the past. I mean, I've been with this man for 32 years. And if I go into the house, I'm in a little she shed in the back of my house, right? So if I go into the house and I interact with my alcoholic husband that I really struggled with in my addiction to 15 years ago, and how we were interacting with our kids, we wouldn't be together because that was who we were then. And so if I constantly am interacting with him then I can't be in our best selves now. And we're both working really hard on our best selves now, but his working on him is his responsibility.
Yeah, and his journey. And you mentioned a few words earlier on, like enmeshment and the way things get blended and also codependence. I wonder if you can give us like a definition of like what is codependence and how that's kind of played out in your relationship and how you manage it.
Thank you. So I think of codependence as putting someone else's needs before your own. So you think of somebody else before you think of yourself, and that you're relying on somebody else for your physical, spiritual, emotional, financial stability, right? So if you're every my codependence is so intense, and this is my entire journey and part of my whole community of working on, I don't think of myself first. I believed that if you were okay, then I could be okay. I needed you to be okay for me to be okay. And so in my relationships with my husband and my kids, I didn't put my, not that you're a selfish well-being at the top, but like my emotional self, I needed and wanted everybody else's stuff to be okay. So then I'm in control. I'm trying to control the world to try to make it look a certain way. And you can't control anything outside of yourself. Can't control anything outside of yourself. I mean, I'm powerless over alcohol, right? Powerless over alcohol. And when my life becomes unmanageable, and I'm powerless over other people's addictions, lives, you know, dysfunctions, whatever it is. And when I try to be in charge of that, my life becomes unmanageable. And that codependence is us trying to manage and control everything around us.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. And I think what you said really is important. I need you to be okay so I can be okay. And it's almost like if I rescue you and save you and you stop drinking and you kind of become this great person, then I'll be okay because I'll stop feeling all these emotions of the anxiety and worry and all of that kind of stuff. And we become sort of attached to the other person's emotions.
We can become addicted to other people's emotions, especially, the people that I work with who have addicts in their lives. We become so addicted to their behaviors. And it seems so interesting to me because we were talking about lying to ourselves, right? Earlier. So I would tell myself I wasn't going to drink for a day, right? I'm not going to drink today. And I would be driving to the liquor store, telling myself I'm not going to drink today, and buying a bottle of wine. I'm not going to drink today. I'm paying for the wine I bring home. I'm like, everything in me is these two parts of myself saying, I'm not going to do this action as I'm pouring, as I'm drinking, right? And then I catch myself on the same intensity of like, this was my issue. I'm better now, but I'm not going to worry about or control or try to make something happen around my husband or my kids' addictions. But I'm as intensely saying I'm not going to do it while I'm doing it as I did when I was drinking. So I think that sometimes we don't realize as codependents or obsessed with somebody else's addiction that we are addicted to their addiction in the same way they're addicted to their addiction.
Yeah, yeah. And how do we break free from that codependence? What's the opposite of codependence? Is it interdependence? And how do we break free from it and stop being codependent?
How do we? Is that your
Yeah,
question?
yeah,
Oh, yeah. So I think Al-Anon is so profound and amazing, and that has been really such a huge piece of my life is doing the 12 steps through Al-Anon. I created through Soul Recovery 9 steps of soul recovery that are modeled after Al-Anon, but really have more of a spiritual opening around them because for me, a spiritual path has been what's made me happy and healthy, right? Recover Your Soul is a spiritual path to a happy and healthy life. And um, when I was in my head and I was trying to solve all these pains and wounds that were in my heart from my thinking, there was no resolve for that because I'm limited in my thinking. And so I think when we move into our heart and we move into our spiritual connection and oneness with source, whatever that is for you, higher power, whatever that is for you, then we can start to quit making our family members our higher power. We can quit making the people in our life be what makes us okay. If I can truly come into my authentic, healed, whole self, which loves all of me, which loves my addict, which loves my husband's addict, which loves my kids' addicts, loves the light, loves the dark, like accepts all of me, sees all of my woundings. I quit trying to fix the world because I feel content in myself. And that contentment within myself is my connection to my wholeness. And when I quit seeing myself as broken, then I quit needing somebody else to fix me. So for me, it's really around wholeness and connection to self and higher power.
yeah, yeah. And becoming whole in yourself. And like you say, not making the addict in your life the higher power and to find that for yourself, whether that be God or spirituality or yourself, like whatever it may be, finding that higher power for you.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly. And I think a lot of people, are afraid to step into the rooms or into spirituality because of their trauma from childhood around religion. And um, what I love about what I love about AA is that it offers it is whatever it is for you.
yeah,
I mean, it's so important for it to be whatever it is for you. It doesn't have to be what anybody else believes. It's your own relationship.
yeah, yeah. And what's the difference for people that don't know between Al-Anon and AA, and Yeah, how does that kind of work? What is a meeting? How does it work? Give us a little synopsis.
Yeah, so what's interesting is we've come so far from 100 years ago when AA came around, right? I think it was in the maybe AA was, I'm thinking of Unity. AA was in the 60s. So 40s. I can't remember. I'm gonna totally fail on that. Anyway, a long time ago, right? When shit was really hitting the fan and we were in the depression and all that stuff was happening and people were really gutter drunks, this concept of the hopeless came through a spiritual awakening, that spirituality could take you out of your addiction. And and that's really the foundation of AA, which has a connection to metaphysical new thought, which is what my spiritual foundation is, which I think is so interesting because it was really stepping away from the norms of the time, which were standard religions, standard expectations. And so AA allowed people to go into a space where they were accepted, anonymous, and able to walk through a step, the 12 steps with somebody who had been there. Nobody can tell you how to get better from something that doesn't understand where you've been. And then Al Anon was created from the wife of the founder who was really involved, but was realizing I need something too. And so to be a loved one of someone who's an addict is pretty intense, and it really affects your life. Alcoholism and addiction are family diseases. They affect everybody profoundly. And so walking into the rooms, each one, AA and Al Anon, are a little different, and at the same time they're the same. But they're not the only way to get sober anymore. Now I love that there's so many sober communities that are sober curious. There's Annie Grace's This Naked Mind. There's oh my gosh, there's so many communities that are really allowing people to come forth and be in sobriety in new ways. You don't have to be a fall down addict who's lost everything to decide that it doesn't work for you. Addiction isn't just alcoholism. I mean, it's pornography, it's shopping, it's TV, it's food, it's sugar, it's running, it's so many different things. Anytime you're doing something to shut out your heart, or it's a compulsive behavior, really there's something underneath that needs to be healed and to be looked at. And it's a great opportunity to do that.
Yeah. And you mentioned that real going underneath and really looking at what was going on for you. I mean, did you get that out of the rooms? And, what has Al Anon and AA like really brought to your life?
What I think that they what it really allowed me to do was to step into a spiritual world. And I've done the 12 steps multiple times, through both AA and Al-Anon, and looking at your life in a way that breaks it down and heals the attachment to your wounds, I think allows us to really look into the dark corners of ourselves that we're afraid to look at. And what I love about the fourth step in AA is a fearless moral inventory, taking a fearless moral inventory of yourself. When we look at our resentments and you look at where you're holding on to pain, we're generally holding on to pain believing that somebody else is creating our pain. And what I feel like the 12 steps allows us to do in the fourth and fifth step, and the fifth step being that you share with somebody else this experience, right? This, what are your resentments? You can start to open up and realize, what is my part? How have I been behaving in this? How can I accept these parts of myself, and how can I accept these parts in other people? And this ability to do that, um, and then to make amends to people, and to figure out where you can have kindness to yourself, kindness to others. These places open up the ability for you to let go of the shame that I think is so often the foundation of why we drink in the first place, or use in the first place. Why are we trying to shut down, right? Why are we trying to control and manipulate if you're in Al-Anon, or in codependence? Looking at those inner parts of ourselves without any judgment, someone who's non-judgmental, that's what happens when you go into the rooms, can really help you let go of the compulsive behaviors.
Yeah, I think that's amazing and really, really important. And like you say, to work the steps is really, really important. And you, Rachel, have been on both sides, right? You've got family members who are in addiction. You've been through addiction yourself. Myself, I had my mum who drank and used drugs and been through my own journey of addiction. I'm on both sides as well. But some of the people, especially family members of addicts, maybe they've never even drunk alcohol in their life, or they've never done drugs, or they've never done those things, and they're just like, I don't understand it. I don't get why they're doing it. I don't get what drugs is about. Like, why would you do cocaine? Like, why would you drink that much? Like, I just don't get it. I have an off switch. Why don't they have an off switch? Do you think it's better or worse to kind of have a foot in both camps, or not?
I think I'm lucky that I can understand. I'm in a situation right now. My kids are 24 and 27. And I just talked about my husband, right, who has been still on and off drinking for the last couple years, and even in all of that. So my boys were just they left last night. They were here for we sort of do a in between the holidays thing. And they're rolling joints, and going out into the garage and smoking weed. And 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 it makes my husband crazy, which I think is funny because he's the one who has been struggling the most with his addiction. And he wants them to make different choices for than he did. He really wants them to make different choices than he did. And because I was an addict, I think when I was 24, all I wanted to do was to get high. So it's impossible for me to have some sort of judgment on them that says, act like a 53-year-old, get to this place. So if you've never had addiction to drugs or alcohol, I think it can be really hard to understand, like, can't you see what you're doing to yourself? And when we do really realize that this is a demon, it is really a compulsive behavior, and we take I like to say, you take it's like you take the spotlight off the alcohol or the drug, and you start looking at kind of what the human being that's underneath, that is whole but is in pain. And if you can put the energy there, you can start to say, are they in pain, or are they chasing something? Like for my kids, right? Like they're chasing the fun, right? So some of it is their pain from growing up in an alcoholic home. And this is how they were taught. This is how they were taught how to deal with stuff. This is how they were taught. How did they see their parents handle stuff? They saw us drink. They saw us, we didn't use drugs, but they saw us drink. They saw us hang out with friends and drink. They saw us drink when we were in our misery. They saw, like, this is what you do. So if you haven't witnessed that in yourself, it can be really hard to understand. And yet, if we're really honest, everybody does something to check out. And so part of this, recovery journey in all of us is to look at ourselves first and say, how can I quit putting so much energy on what the other person is doing and put attention to myself? What do I need? What's going on with me? And to have more compassion around, is it a genetic addiction? Is it a pain addiction? Is it a chasing the fun? Is it a empty hole in the heart? Like, what's going on? And put more emphasis on trying to be helpful to those situations than demanding that there's no drugs or alcohol, because that's really the band-aid over the top of the wound.
Yeah. And also that rarely works, right? If you just say, don't ever do this, don't do that, when you're too like critical and punishing, that generally just doesn't end very well.
Yeah. I mean, so my husband will say, like, well, I just wish the kids would come and not do anything while they're here. And I'm like, man, if when I was 24, if you had told me to go someplace for 6 days and not use, I wouldn't have gone, or I would have hit it, or I would have, like, I would have done it anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you said it perfectly. I would have gone and hid it, or I wouldn't have gone, right? There were the
Right.
options. I wouldn't have not done it. I definitely would have done it. It would have just been like, how do I decide? Either I'm not going to go and I'm still going to just smoke my joints, or I'm going to go and smoke my joints and just pretend that no one notice. Going to walk down the street and smoke it rather than in the garage. It doesn't really make
Exactly.
a difference to me. It's just whatever I want to do.
And it is, and you know, everybody needs to have their own boundaries. So this is for me, and my boundaries is, you know, I've been sober for 6 years. I'm not tempted. It doesn't bother me. Now, if they were totally screwed up, you know, and I might have a different boundary, but interestingly enough for them, it's like it's just normal for them and they act basically the same. So I don't want to give anybody the, you know, like I'm saying, like, don't do it if you don't feel comfortable with it. It's whatever it is for your family. Like for me,
Yeah,
this is my choice. My choice is I'd rather they just came and they were themselves because in these places of letting them be themselves, we have these powerful conversations around what's addiction and what does it look like. And they've been on my both of my kids have been on my podcast for years going through their different phases. You know, one of my kids was just on the podcast, he was in a sobriety phase, right? And so and things had really been helpful for him. So the more that I allow us to have this open conversation and I'm the model of how to work on myself instead of spending all my energy on working on them, they come to me and they ask me real questions and they connect really deeply with what's going on with them. And I'm not shaming them, I'm opening the door to them saying, yeah, I really would like to not use as much, or I'm trying to, you know, just party a little bit more on the weekends and not do this, not do that. And I think that empowering them to make their own decisions because nobody could have told me to stop drinking.
yeah.
Nobody.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it's really important, like you say, to lead by example and you're focusing on yourself. You're not putting all your energy on trying to make them stop doing it. You're focusing on you, you're accepting them, loving them. Yes, you're still having your boundaries, but you're supporting them on the journey the best you can. And someone once said to me in like a seminar, rather than walking around trying to light everyone else's candles, and by the time you light the first person, the third person's gone out, then you go back to the first person, try and light everyone's
Right.
candles. He said, just shine so bright, all those around you spontaneously combust. And I just
I love
always
that.
remembered that because it's like just focus on yourself, not from a selfish place, but from a selfless place of really working on yourself. And I feel like with family members of addicts, we all spend so much time focusing on the addict and putting all the energy there rather than ourselves. And yeah, I just think what you're saying is a perfect example of the value of that and how that is just such the right decision to do that because, like you say, then they come to you and they ask you questions and they're like, hey, mum, what's going on? How do I do this? How do I do that? And they're receptive and you have a relationship and you can help them and actually have a much bigger impact.
And they're having their own consequences. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, ultimately we learn from our own consequences. So one of my pitfalls that I had when they were younger is I was trying to save them so much from pain, um, that in a way they didn't get a chance to be uncomfortable because I was saving them from being uncomfortable. And so then when life got uncomfortable, what did they use to make themselves feel more comfortable? They used the same thing I used to make myself feel more comfortable, you know? So it's this funny part of human beings that we have to be able to learn how to stand in our own discomfort and how to be in a place that is uneasy. And we just spent 6 days together, and every time we're together, it gets better and better and better from like the dysfunction that our family was. You know, we've always loved each other deeply, which I'm grateful for, but there would be big blow ups. There would be like, this was the best trip yet, still. You know, I mean, like every time it gets better and better because they're getting older. I'm not trying to control the whole situation like I used to try to manage everybody. We're not all drinking or messed up, so we're not in high elevated states like that. And then there's boundaries like we paid for dinners, but if they got drinks, I asked for a separate tab for them to pay for their own drinks. Like I'm not going to enable that kind of behavior. And that felt comfortable to me, to be able to have those kinds of boundaries. Like, I'm not driving you to the dispensary, but if you want to find a way there, go ahead. So it's allowing them to be themselves, but me really stopping the cycle of, if you're okay, I'm okay, and working on, I'm okay, and I would love for you to be okay. And the more that that happens, the more that I'm distanced from my need to drink, my need to use, my need to shut down. And the more I'm in my own centered self that can handle hard things. I could never handle hard things before, but I can do it now.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing and such a important life lesson for us all, I really feel. And you have your husband and your kids in your life, and sometimes it's challenging different relationships when it comes to addiction. What are some of the nuances and differences between a husband and then kids who are in addiction?
You know, one of the things that happened in our life early on, Luke, was my husband and I battled around how to deal with the kids. And that was one of our main arguing points that we really fought around. And I always put the kids first. And we actually, the story I wasn't going to tell in the middle was that we separated for a while because we were fighting so much about it. And it's interesting because I just did a podcast recently with Aaron Huey, who was the director of the treatment center that we sent our son to for 6 months when he was 17. And his advice was spirit, relationships, and then kids, you know, spirit, relationship, kids. And mine was kids, relationship, spirit, right? So I had it flipped. And so when I think about how much we fought over the kids, and that I continually picked the children, and I didn't put my husband first, and then I didn't put spirituality at the top of all of that, it's like, of course all the sand is going to fall out, right? So what I've done now is I've flipped it. And part of it is because my kids are now adults. When they were younger, they were under my care. So of course I tried to mama bear them as much as I could, but they're adults now. They need to have their own consequences, right? So if they choose to spend their money a certain way, if they get it, one of them just got a ticket for not wearing a seatbelt and didn't have car insurance, and it's like, you got to pay those bills. You've got to do what it takes to like deal with those situations. So now I think that what's different is that I can separate with detachment. Detachment is such a huge thing in recovery when you have somebody that's an addict in your life, like detaching with love, really letting them have their own experience. But then I've put my relationship with my husband as, now it's spirit and then it's my husband, because this is my life partner and it's my best friend, and he's still working on his addictions. But what I watch him is, I watch him wanting to grow himself emotionally, spiritually, intellectually. And so I've let go of like the obsession with him not drinking, and I've opened more to our growth as human beings. And I think that that also has a loving detachment, because I need him to be able to do his own thing because I'm with me, right? I'm with me. So I put myself and myself with spirit first, and that relationship first, so that I can support the other ones and not have it be codependent.
Yeah, yeah, and I think detaching with love is so important, and it can be really, really hard. It can be really hard. How do we deal with the emotions that come up when we're trying to detach with love?
Coming back to the third step in AA and Al-Anon, which is a higher power, turning it over to a higher power. I think that if I can really believe that I'm being held and guided by something greater still, and really believe that my family members have the same available to them, then it comes out of my hands that I think I have to do it. So the more that I recognize that everybody has to go through their own journeys and their own path, and I can't possibly understand what those journeys are. If this is our curriculum of life, is our is our curriculum of our soul's journey, can I let go of the belief that I think I know best? That's the number one thing. And, the 7 principles of detachment in Al-Anon, not to prevent a crisis, not to create a crisis, not to do for them, there's these 7 principles. If I can really live by those of allowing them to have their own experience, then I quit putting all of my energy in what's happening for them, for for me to be okay, right? It's that, like,
Yeah.
I need to let them have their experience. So really spirituality for me is the way to do that. Prayer, meditation, journaling, reading, connecting with others, really staying grounded and centered in my strength of myself and letting them have their experience even if it's hard.
Yeah. And I think that's really important to let them have their experience and detach from what you said at the beginning, which was, sometimes we feel like I need you to be okay so I can be okay, and detaching from that and being like, I'm okay. And I kind of really hope that you're okay and that you go on the right journey. But I'm over here leading by example, and I hope you choose to join me when you're ready.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
sometimes that means we have to leave people behind,
Yeah.
you know,
And
and that's really painful, even children.
yeah. And how do we know? How do we know whether we should stay or leave? How do you make that
Mhm.
decision? And along your journey of all the different ups and downs, how's that been for you?
I've luckily haven't had to totally detach from anybody in a no contact way, but I've emotionally, I would say that it's a slow and steady process. It's not something that is easy, and it's not something that it comes lightly. And the more that we work on our internal selves, the more strength that we have, and it comes in flashes. It's like you can have a really healthy boundary and feel really healthy, and then something will come and it'll trigger and snap some of those old feelings, and we kind of fall backwards, and that's okay. So I think it's really around being gentle to yourself to allow the whole process. And there are times and situations where you have to make a hard call, to not have interactions with people. Um, I really let my kids, luckily, my kids live in another state. And so I really let them live their own life. And that detachment of not calling them every day, not obsessing on what they're doing. They got on the airplane last night, and my husband and I both were like, good. So we're sort of back to our own lives, like really being okay that that's okay, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. That makes perfect sense. And I think it's what I'm hearing is like a spectrum, right, between completely no contact versus being a bit more like distance versus being like codependent and overbearing and too much. Like there's a spectrum of detachment in a way. And it's about working out where it is good for you and also allowing it to ebb and flow along that kind of spectrum as well.
Exactly. Exactly. And really it always just comes back to attending to yourself. Relationships are so important, but the more that we really connect to ourselves and we love ourselves and we feel comfortable in our own skin and we don't need somebody else to approve of us, the more healthy that we can get. It happens, these relationships, no matter how much they are not changing or changing, they grow and they shift. And we can't depend on anybody else to provide us with our self-esteem or our wellness, and so much of addiction is around such a broken heart. And when we heal our own heart, then the sky's the limit. The sky's the limit. And those relationships we get such clarity on, and we can just heal the wounds from the past with almost instantaneously sometimes.
Yeah, yeah. And as we come towards the end, Rachel, how can people find out more about you? Where can they go to connect with you?
Thank you, Luke. So I have a website called recoveryoursoul.net. And you can find out everything that you need there. There's the podcast, there is access to the Facebook online community. I do a monthly free Zoom support group the first Monday of every month. And I also do spiritual coaching. So everything that you need is on the website, and you can find the Recover Your Soul podcast on all streaming platforms.
Awesome, amazing, amazing. And anything you want to sign out with or leave the audience with as we sign out?
I just want to say that we're all in soul recovery. Whether you're an addict, whether you love an addict, whether you don't have that in your life, the truth is that being a human being is really complicated. And part of the journey is for us to learn to love ourselves and to see ourselves in the beautiful humans that we are, and to really allow our experience to teach us so that we can be our best selves. And so when we look at addiction in a way of love instead of in a battle against, I think that we can open ourselves up to deep, true healing and let go of the fight and open up to really accepting ourselves completely and releasing all the shame and guilt that is trying to hold on to us.
Yeah, amazing, amazing. That was a great message to sign out with. And yeah, thanks very much for coming on the podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, Luke. I really appreciate the opportunity.